Codex charges twice as much per output token as Kimi K3, and on terminal bench, Kimi K3 still outscored it 88.3 to 83.4. So you're paying more and getting less accuracy. Both tools are getting a ton of attention right now, and the pricing gap gets more painful the more you scale. So I pulled together 15 verified sources and ran Kimi K3 versus Codex across 5 real tests with no vendor money and no spin. What surprised me though is that the cheaper model with the bigger context window doesn't automatically win everything, because Codex fights back hard in one specific area that could be exactly what keeps you locked in. All right? This comparison is for developers and teams who are literally hammering these tools every day on real coding work. And if you're running large refactors, building agents, or just trying to keep your API bill from spiraling, picking the wrong one here costs you real money and real time every single week. Test 1 is speed and latency. And when a model is slow, you don't just wait a little longer, your whole flow breaks, you lose context, you lose momentum. And if you're running an agent loop, a sluggish response time can turn a 10-minute task into a 45-minute mess that you have to babysit. So here's what the data actually shows. And honestly, the lopsidedness surprised me. Kimi K3 via Fireworks hits 164.4 tokens per second with a 13.27 second time to first token, which is fast, but Codex has 0 published speed figures, so you're basically pulling a lever on a slot machine with no payout screen. Take this with a grain of salt though, because Kimi K3's own direct API is way slower at 32.6 tokens per second with a 207 second time to first token, which is honestly pretty rough. Though the 164.4 number is provider dependent. And since Codex publishes nothing, we genuinely can't call a winner here. I was expecting at least one clean speed number from Codex and got nothing. So this one's a tie by default. Codex just doesn't show its cards. And the score stays at 0-0-1 tied. Test 2 is code generation accuracy. And when a model gets this wrong, you ship a bug, your tests fail in CI, and you spend 2 hours debugging code you didn't write. So bad code generation is a hidden time tax that compounds every single sprint. On terminal bench 2.1, which is the only head-to-head score we actually have, Kimi K3 lands at 88.3 and Codex comes in at 83.4. And that's a real gap, though Kimi's score is vendor reported and Codex's comes from community data at yauk.ai, so these aren't identical test setups. Honestly, I was expecting this to be closer, but Kimi K3 takes code generation with a nearly 5-point lead on the one benchmark, where both had numbers, and that puts the running score at Kimi K3 1, Codex 0, with 1 tied. Test 3 is context window and multi-file handling, and when your context window is too small, the model starts forgetting earlier files mid-refactor, so you get half-baked changes, broken references, and the model confidently rewriting code it can no longer see. That's a workflow killer, full stop. This one's pretty clear. Kimi K3 gives you 1 million tokens of context, and Codex caps at 400,000, so that's 2.5 times larger, which is a big deal when you're feeding in an entire code base or a long document chain. And both numbers come straight from vendor documentation, so I'm confident in them. I kind of figured Codex would close the gap here given OpenAI's resources, but nope. Kimi K3's 1 million token window is just a different league, and that moves the scoreboard to Kimi K3 2, Codex 0, 1 tie. Test 4 is IDE and workflow integration, and this one matters in a really practical way, because if your tool doesn't plug into the IDE you already live in, you're either context switching constantly or you're maintaining a parallel setup. And both options waste time and kill the flow you actually paid for. Kimi K3 covers VS Code and Terminal, while Codex has VS Code, JetBrains, CLI, and CI/CD pipeline support. Both are OpenAI SDK compatible, so that part's matched. But Codex's JetBrains coverage is real, and for IntelliJ or PyCharm users, that's not a small thing. Now, if you're already in VS Code, this gap basically disappears because Kimi K3's VS Code agent and terminal integration work fine, and both tools share the same API compatibility, so the edge Codex has is specifically for JetBrains users. And if that's not you, this test is pretty much a wash. I was expecting Kimi K3 to close this gap with its terminal flexibility, but Codex's 3 agent modes and JetBrains support are genuinely broader. So Codex wins IDE integration, and that brings the running score to Kimi K3 2, Codex 1 with 1 tied. Test 5 is pricing and cost efficiency. And this is where things get really interesting for anyone running these at scale, because when you're generating thousands of output tokens per session across a whole team, a 50% price difference is a budget conversation with your manager, full stop. What surprised me is how clean the gap is. Kimi K3 runs at $3 per million input tokens and $15 per million output tokens. Codex is $5 input and $30 output. So output is literally half the price. With Kimi K3, and cash input is also cheaper at 30 cents versus 50 cents per million tokens. I thought the gap would be meaningful, but not this clean. Kimi K3 is 40% cheaper on input and 50% cheaper on output. So Kimi K3 takes pricing easy, and the final running score is Kimi K3 3, Codex 1, 1 tied. Kimi K3 wins on 3 things that actually move the needle for heavy users. The 1 million token context window is 2.5 times what Codex allows. output tokens cost half the price, and it outscored Codex 88.3 to 83.4 on Terminal Bench. So if you're doing serious coding work at scale, those three add up fast. Codex wins on ecosystem depth. It supports JetBrains alongside VS Code, which is a real advantage for IntelliJ and PyCharm users. And it also has CLI support, CI/CD pipeline integration, and 3 distinct agent modes in the IDE extension. So if your workflow is already built around the OpenAI ecosystem, Codex slots in cleanly. Honestly, I went in thinking this would be closer than it is, but Kimi K3 won 3 of the 4 comparable tests. So here's how I'd call it. If you need a massive context window, cheaper tokens, and strong benchmark scores, go Kimi K3 because output is half the price. And if you live in JetBrains or you're deep in the OpenAI ecosystem with CI/CD pipelines already wired up, Codex is the cleaner fit.